Thank you, Robert. We're going to move into wrap-up now. Herb has got some thoughts. I just might mention one thing that I recall as we talk here. Pappy said there are two important things in square dancing: the dance and the dancer. And the caller is that lucky individual who stands in the middle and gets credit for bringing the two together. Herb?
How many of you are round dancers? Bob, as we sit here, you get triggered. Bob mentioned Central City, and we danced in Central City for the Central City Opera every summer. I believe it was in 1938 we were dancing in Williams Barn. And this beautiful blonde dancer who was appearing at the Teller House across the street, which is a famous old hotel up there with a face on the barroom floor. She came over and said, "May I watch you dance?" And Pappy said, "Well, certainly." And she used to come and watch us dance. And one day she came over to Pappy and she said, "Would you mind, I love the dancing so much and I love watching you so much. Would you mind if I showed you a little dance that we used to do in my country?" And Pappy said, "Well, I'd love to have it. Anything new, anything interesting." And she showed him this lovely waltz where the couple waltzed, and the lady would put her hand behind her back, the man would take it, and then you would change back and forth. And that lady's name was Tamara. Not Tamara. Her name was Tamara. And she taught us. Pappy said, "Come here, kids." And he rounded us up, and she taught us that day the Tamara waltz. And that's where we get our Tamara in our modern round dancing. So that's kind of interesting. Boy, that really shows your age.
Herb, I'm not so sure. I thought Pappy always was in love with her. But she kept singing Tomorrow. As we talk about Pappy, sometimes I'm sure we tend to put him on a pedestal, and a lot of people that didn't know him that well try to do that. And he was so human, I don't like to see that. Pappy's the last guy in the world that would want to be put on a pedestal. But let me just show you how innovative it was, to show you that he was not just an old fogey. Many of you can't think back to the early 1930s, but in the 1930s, Cheyenne School, where Pappy was principal, was the only school in the United States that had its own glider, and the students flew it off the football field. Governor John Love, a previous former governor in Colorado, being one of those. Cheyenne School at that time was one of the few, and perhaps the only school around the country that had its own rodeo every year, where the kids participated. Cheyenne School was the only school that I ever heard of during that period of time that had its own off-road automobile club, driving through the gullies and the mountains. I wish you could see some of those old films that were made during that time. It's really hilarious. But this was while Pappy was principal. He was willing to try anything, innovative, new, challenging, and sure, kids got hurt in a rodeo. Sure, once in a while a car would turn over and somebody would get scratched. You couldn't do those things nowadays, could you? Boy, the libel suits, the liability suits, be terrible. But Pappy was willing to try anything for the kids, anything new, anything innovative. I hear people say something about new square dance callers. I'm going, "Oh boy, Pappy would roll over in his grave." I don't think so. Pappy, I think, would be up there saying, hey, let me take a look at that. Now, if we do it this way, I think if Pappy were alive, he might give Copman fits.
Thank you. I remember a couple of other things. A caller must first be a dancer and then a caller. To be a successful dancer, a successful caller, he should be adequate or better as a dancer. A caller should be able to handle all phases of the activity, not just be a specialist in one field, but be able to call and teach the squares, singing as well as patter calls, the couple or round dances, contras, quadrilles. An adequate caller should be a triple threat man at least. There were only, in all the positive things that he talked about, there were only that I remember 2 definite no-nos. Do you know what they were? Competition was one. Square dancing is a competitive, a cooperative activity, not competitive. And I think it's because of his beliefs on this that we have made it such a strong deal with the National Square Dance Convention and with all the other things that have been done. That has been one of the things that we have managed to steer clear of. Competition between callers. He used to tell a story about one particular caller who became world champion. This is in the late 1940s. 2 people had entered the contest and one didn't show up. The other was world champion. And I remember, as far as competition between dancers was pretty big in the period right after World War II. There was a group from Laramie, Wyoming that came down to the Panhandle in Texas to a contest. And they had worked a long time with their caller, and they were quite good dancers. But when they danced and the contest was on, they took second place. And the first place dancers were a group from Texas somewhere, and they did a beautiful job. And the kids from Laramie all went up to the kids that had just won, and there was going to be open dancing, the open square dancing for the next tip to finish out the evening. And so each one of the kids from the Laramie group said to the kids that had won, will you trade partners with us so that we can have the fun of dancing with you? They said, no, we can't dance with anyone else but our own group. We don't know anything but that one pattern that we did. That was all that they did. Shaw used to tell great stories on the set of Dew in the Sun. I saw a picture not long ago. Have you seen it recently, Dew in the Sun? Yeah. Every once in a while they pull it out. And in some of the stuff where they haven't cut it too much, you see Shaw up in the balcony calling down to the group. And I guess that as best he could, despite the fact that he couldn't walk too well, he taught the Varsouiana to Gregory Peck. And was it Jennifer Jones, was it?
Jennifer Jones.
In that? The other no-no would be what? Drinking. He, in his research that Herbert talked about, going to the mining camps and going throughout the different western areas, trying to get stories and get dances, he tried to find out why square dancing had stopped before, because it was on a great upswing, and this is the early 1900s, and it was, as I remember it, it was because it began to settle into the bar rooms. It began to settle into the places where the characters were not always the greatest influences on anything. And he always looked at that thing and he said, in square dancing you need no artificial stimulation. Square dancing is in itself all a person needs. And if you can hurt the feelings of a single individual by being less than a gentleman or a lady on the dance floor, it's not worth embarrassing anyone. And as Bob said, costume was very important to him. And as a result of the Cheyenne Mountain Dancers, who, as Herb said, traveled from one part of the United States at one time and then came out to the other side of the country on another and would hit Canada, the costumes that they wore were full-length dresses, pantaloons clear down to the floor virtually, and those were the costumes as part of their costume that they had. They had a number of costumes, which brings me to my epilogue. Did you have anything you wanted to add before I epilogue?
One comment.
One comment.
Yes,
You bet.
before you wind it down, Bob. To show you what this man, the courage that he had, Pappy Shaw told me that when he took the job as superintendent of Cheyenne Mountain School, he wrote out a resignation and set it in the drawer and said, I'm going to, there's some things I want to do. Of course, many of his activities, the rodeo, as Herb mentions, and several of these things, the football team, I think, disappeared for a few years there because I guess they didn't have that good a team. Maybe they did, I don't know, but there were several things that, did they, maybe you come back to that.
Didn't have enough people.
Oh, that was it, they didn't have enough people for a football team, that was it, so they had to do other things. But he wrote out this resignation, and finally, at the very end, there was enough parental pressure, and I know exactly of what he talks because it's the reason I left education. Pappy sat with that resignation in the drawer all those years, and finally when the pressure got on that the people wanted this and wanted that and they wanted these other things, he then opened the drawer, took up the resignation, and that was the end of his teaching career. But it takes, I've often thought, boy, that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to write out a resignation on the day you're hired for a job.
Several times we've talked about Pappy walking with canes and so forth, and it was not a result of polio or anything like that, but Pappy was in a horrendous automobile accident 2 blocks from where I lived, as a matter of fact, and tore his legs up, and so much of what he did was done as really a handicapped person. He had a terrible time getting around, a lot of pain, a lot of trouble, and yet you'd never know it from the way he acted and what he did. But that's why he was a cripple. It was from this really horrendous automobile accident. Pappy had too many things on his mind to be entrusted with a car anyhow. He liked to talk to people in the back seat. So.
I imagine that it would be difficult for anyone who may not have had this experience of being with Shaw to understand why it gets through to us and what it has meant. I'm sure I wouldn't be sitting here today, and maybe none of us would be if it hadn't been for the influence and the inspiration and stimulation to the activity that Shaw had given. That's why it gets so deep inside. I think, all these years of putting out a magazine, putting out records, and all these great fun things that I've had an opportunity to do, and the friends that I've met, gosh, I just don't know, they are so important. Well, let me tell you this last epilogue. I told you, we have time, I think, Herb. I think I told you that about 1948, we just formed 2 associations in our area, and it was the year after several of us had traveled to Colorado Springs for the first time. And we were gung-ho. The newspapers in our area had regular features and columns on square dancing. The magazine was starting. And so we thought, well, let's do the biggest thing we can. Let's bring the Cheyenne Mountain Dancers and Pappy Shaw up to California. And so we set up 2 shows, one on a Thursday night at Hollywood High School Auditorium, a huge auditorium, and then on Monday night, another one in Pasadena Civic Auditorium, another huge auditorium. And the days in between, let's have this clinic that I mentioned that sold out completely with just allowing 1 couple from each existing club in the area. So it was all planned, and in no time at all the seats were sold for both performances. the theater critics in the newspapers covered what was going to happen, and they had sold out signs on the ads that ran in the theater pages. So Shaw left Colorado Springs, this was in November, and drove the kids down through Albuquerque and Tucson and into San Diego. And I can't remember whether they had a performance that night or not, but they left early the next morning on the Thursday that they were going to open at Hollywood High School. And they came to the coast. The kids got the first view of the mighty Pacific Ocean. And as they drove up, you've all been, I guess, most of you, to California. You know where La Jolla is, how beautiful that is. They stopped the bus so the kids could get a first-hand look at the ocean. And as kids do, they all got up to the edge, and several of the more adventuresome went down on the rocks, down close to the surf. And a wave came and took 3 of them into the surf. 2 of them, they got out safely. Tommy Collins, one of the young dancers, drowned. Now, this was just a little before noon on the Thursday before they were to perform in our area. And as soon as they had gotten themselves back together and sort of had an idea that they would continue on at least to the Los Angeles area, Shaw got on the phone to me. There were only 2 of us that were really in on the direct planning of this, and he said, "Bob, here's what's happened," and he filled me in. He said, "I don't think we're going to go on with the show, but don't cancel it yet. We'll know more when we see you. If you'll meet us at the hotel in Santa Monica, then if it doesn't work, you can be at the theater to refund the money." So they drove on from La Jolla on up to the San Juan Capistrano Mission. And in the meantime, Shaw got on the phone and was able to reach the parents of the young boy. And they said to him, you know, if the kids all feel that they can do it, please go ahead and put on the show tonight and dedicate it to Tommy. So the kids talked it over among themselves, and they had a quiet time in the mission, and they drove on and decided among themselves that they would go ahead and put the show on. Now, when they got to Santa Monica, they said, well, let's do it. Let's not tell anybody. So Ralph Maxheimer and I just decided, okay, we would just keep the thing quiet. And that night, for the performance, they needed every one of the 16 dancers they had for a couple of the big numbers that they did. They did a Lancers in the full dress. They did a Mexican number, Matlanchinas, wouldn't it have been? And then they did some of these great square dances, but they needed every dancer. So in order to fill that 16th spot, that 8th man, they went to the University of Southern California and got a 60-year-old dance teacher. And his name was Jack. And he was absolutely terrific. And he could fit into the costume of this 16-year-old square dancer. No rehearsal, no time. And they went onto that stage ready to go, and just before showtime, to this full audience, the curtain opened. Shaw came out with his 2 canes, and he simply said, I'd like to dedicate this show to Tommy Collins. Nothing else. The piano started, the curtains opened, and these kids danced. Joe Fadler was our photographer then, and he was taking pictures above the stage, and he said, I'll swear that those kids were dancing closer to me than they were to the floor. They were dancing a foot off the floorboards. It was a tremendous thing. You can imagine what it had been like for those kids dancing with this knowledge. By halftime, by the intermission, the word got out and the people in the audience knew. But I've never seen a performance like that. And the reason for bringing this up, it was just one more example to me of the love and the dedication and what went behind the start of the square dance movement in our area. Never forget it. And we, Herb and Bob and I, appreciate your letting us reminisce. We could go on for hours, because this just begins to open up the whole thing, but we do enjoy talking about something that's very important to us. Thank you, Herb. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Church.